Do you have a shady spot in your garden that just feels lifeless and bare? Well, that's all about to change. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to design a cottage shade garden that's lush, vibrant, verdant, and brimming with flowers. You know, a cottage shade garden can be just as colorful, with just as many flowers, just as enchanting as a sun-drenched one with the right plants. So in today's video, I'm going to be showing you all kinds of plants, perennials, biennials and annuals, shrubs, and even some evergreen structural plants for year-round interest. And stick around because I'm actually going to be designing a sample shade garden as well with some gardening software. So let's get growing. So first, I have a really quick favor to ask of you. Would you mind subscribing to our channel? It really does help us out so much, and I've noticed that so many people who watch these videos aren't actually subscribed. And like this video if you like, it really does help. First things first, what is a shade garden really? Many people assume that shade just means absence of sunlight. But there are nuances here. A space in your garden can get some of the harshest, most direct, hot sun late in the afternoon and still be considered a shade garden if it doesn't have 6 hours of full sun. Essentially, if your garden gets less than 6 hours of sunlight a day, it is considered a shade garden. And there are different ranges, you know, it can range from deep shade all the way to partial sun, right? So you can do like deep shade, full shade, partial shade, partial sun, and then you get into the sunnier kind of categories. So some of these shadier spaces, like I mentioned, can be really shady in the morning and then sunnier in the afternoon. They can be sunnier in the morning and shadier in the afternoon. Here's a quick rule of thumb if you're maybe new to your gardening space or you're new to gardening in general, is to just go out, 3 times a day. So I would go out at 10 a.m. and just look at the space that you're kind of flummoxed about, this space that you don't know what to do with. At 10 a.m., is there any sun? At 1 p.m., is there any sun? And at 4 p.m., is there any sun? So just maybe when you're walking your dog out, maybe when you're going to get the mail, you're coming to and from work or whatever, just check at those times. So you don't have to have a meter, you don't have to do all these other things, just check at those specific times if you can. And it doesn't have to be on the same day either. You could check one day and another and another. So if it's in sun all 3 of those times, then very likely you have a sunny garden, right? You have a full sun garden. And if it's in sun for 2 of those times, you're probably looking at partial. You might be able to play around with all different kinds of plants. If it's just in sun 1 of those times, then you have a shade garden. And if it's in sun 0 times, then very likely you have a deep shade garden. So if you're anywhere between 0 and 2, all of the ideas and the varieties of plants I'm going to be talking about will be perfect for your space. Top perennials for a cottage shade garden. Perennials form the foundation of a thriving shade garden. They return year after year, bringing structure and charm to your space. So here are a few of my favorites. Now there are so many, so I've had to narrow it down and then narrow it down again. But I'm gonna start with tiarella, or foam flower. This is a beautiful, some consider it a ground cover. If you've ever seen a heucherella is a hybrid of a heuchera and a tiarella. So think about that, it's this small sort of button of a little shrub that has these beautiful, frothy, beautiful colors like white, ivory, kind of pink, some even that lend a little bit on the lavender, some reddish color, but it's usually soft whites or pinks. And they form in these mounds with really gorgeous foliage. Some of the foliage has beautiful dark veining. Some of it has sort of gorgeous, like lighter variegation on the outside. They can just be such stunning plants. And when they're in bloom, they look so magical. I mean, straight out of a Miyazaki film. They are just these stunning woodland plants. They have the most magical little buds. So that before they actually start to bloom, they almost look like sort of pink or ivory versions of grape hyacinths. So you know how they form those small little bells? They form in these sort of little blossoms all the way up the little spires. And they are just so charming. you know, it's one of those things that you can appreciate them as you're walking through the garden, but really when you can have them in something like an urn that's a little bit higher up. I actually did this at the beginning of last year when we did a spring container that was sort of Miyazaki inspired, actually, and we put some tiarella in there and then transplanted it, divided it and transplanted it into the garden itself. But oh my gosh, sometimes I'm known to like get down on the ground and just stare at the little tiarella blossoms. They are incredible. So let me give you some stats. So these grow between 10 and 18 inches tall, 12 to 24 inches wide. They prefer moist, rich soil, impartial to full shade. And they have delicate, white or pink blooms that kind of resemble tiny bottle brushes. Next up, we have a Astrantia or a masterwort. Now this is not one that I've been able to find in my area, but they are so stunningly beautiful. Very, very whimsical looking cottage garden plant. They love the shade. And so if you're able to find them in your area, if you're able to get your hands on them, then I would highly recommend adding Astrantia or masterwort to your garden. Just a beautiful, they usually come in shades, those sort of light, softer colors. For me, that's fantastic for my garden because I love those softer kind of pastel shades. I really adore those blues, purples, pinks, ivories, and creams, and oh my gosh, blue flowers in the garden. But they look like little kind of pointy buttercups almost. They just look so unique, and they're just kind of like a big kind of miniature firework of beauty and interest. Very, very interesting flower. If you plant that in your garden, I know that people would be very curious about what it is. It's one of those that's just like, oh, that's so magical. Okay, here are the stats. So it grows in zones 4 through 7. It spreads 18 to 24 inches tall, 12 to 18 inches wide. It likes moisture and partial shade. It has unique pincushion shaped flowers that add texture and charm. Next up we have heuchera, or coral bells is the common name. Now, this is a beautiful kind of ruffly foliaged plant that has beautiful spires of flowers that come up in the springtime, and they can sometimes repeat bloom as well. They're very wispy, very ethereal looking blossoms, little blooms. They're very small, but they're very, very elegant plants. And again, they form in these little mounds similar to the tiarella. But one of the benefits of them is that they add so much color and interest all season long because of the color of the leaves. They have broad leaves, so they're really a statement plant, and you can get them in so many different colors, you know, purple, red, silver, yellow, green, deep green, chartreuse green. I mean, so many different colors. They're really, really spectacular. They love a shade garden, and they're really fantastic to pair with so many of the other plants that we have on our list. So these grow in a zone 4 through 9. They are 8 to 18 inches tall and 12 to 24 inches wide, so they can get a couple feet wide. They thrive in partial to full shade and well-draining soil. These are just a fantastic foundational plant for your garden, as is the next one, hostas. Hostas, not a lot of people grow them for their blooms, but they do bloom, and I particularly love the blooms, and so do the hummingbirds. So if you have a shady spot in your garden and you want to attract some hummingbirds or other pollinators and, you know, butterflies and things, then plant some hostas. I think some of the hostas that have these beautiful purple blooms just look incredible. And most people are familiar with hostas. You know, they're used a lot for a reason. It's because they're beautiful, very kind of easy, hard-working plants, gorgeous, broad leaves. Most of them, some of them come in these kind of almost like ribbons coming out of the plant. But in general, as you're walking through the garden, they just, to me, look like giant dahlias, like giant dahlia flowers. They have this very beautiful structure that looks like a flower in and of itself. So for me, I think those are just, it's so beautiful and fantastic. And if you pair those with ferns, that's just an incredible pairing. The difference between the pinnate, fronds of the ferns and these broad leaves of the hostas next to some gorgeous Hacanacloa. I don't think I included ferns or Hacanacloa in this list because I've just talked about them so many times on this channel, but that pairing is stunning. And then add a little purple heuchera next to it. The Shanghai heuchera that I've showed you before is this silvery heuchera that has a purple, silvery and purple, and it's just gorgeous. Those four, can see it now. It'd be really, really beautiful. Put a Brunnera next to them. Come on, this is gonna be sensational. So here are the stats for the hostas. They grow in zones 3 through 9, 1 to 3 feet tall and 2 to 4 feet wide. They thrive in shade, but they need moist, well-draining soil. And one of the best things is they've got these large, lush leaves that just add drama and texture, and they have a way of making everything look healthy. Next up, we have astilbes. Now, astilbes are sort of like if you took tiarella and all the things I described about the flowers of tiarella and just exploded them up and made them macro versions of themselves. They're just such fluffy, fuzzy spires of beauty and elegance. They're very unique in a shade garden because you don't see that many sort of larger spires in a shadier space. A lot of those spires, things like Veronica, Salvia, Russian sage, things like Buddleia, there's so many more. Liatris, Baptisia, red hot poker. So astilbes are just fantastic for adding all kinds of different colors and flower to the garden. You have them that come in all different kinds of colors. You can get purple, you can get red, you can get creamy, ivory, white, you can get yellow. I think you can get yellow. And they just have these feathery plumes of flower. Something else that's really cool about them, in addition to the range of colors and varieties that you can get, is that you can get different varieties that bloom at different times of year. Now, I love this because in our garden, we have some ivory colored astilbes and those bloom pretty early in the season. I think maybe around June. And then we have our purple spires that bloom later in the season. They start to bloom around August. And so to be able to have those that bloom at different times is so nice. And then you can, cut back the flower heads and deadhead them after their first flush. And sometimes they will do a second bloom. But for the most part, it's just sort of the foliage that you're left with. And it's a really beautiful kind of ferny sort of foliage. It's a little bit looser, a little bit smaller leaved, really pretty, and can serve as your ground cover. I've sort of done that throughout the garden, and so it sort of serves as a ground cover, and then when it's time to shine, it sort of like stands straight up and then it goes down again and is just this beautiful ground cover. Now, speaking of ground cover, they will spread very readily throughout your garden. So if you have a space that you want to kind of keep it contained, if you want, you don't love the idea of having to edit and, pull things out or whatever as they start to spread, then maybe steer clear of them. But still, I absolutely love astilbes, and they don't spread like crazy. They're not gonna, take over a space. They're just gonna very gently kind of bulk out and provide this very lush, full space. Astilbes thrive in zones 3 through 8. They grow 12 to 36 inches tall, so you can really plant these in a variety of spaces. They can get really, really tall, and 18 to 24 inches wide. So depending on the variety, always check the plant tag. They prefer partial shade to full sun. They require moist, well-drained soil. And again, those feathery plumes come in pinks and whites and reds and lavenders, and they are excellent for moist shade gardens. Astilbes really do like moist soil. Next up, we have Brunnera, or Siberian bug gloss. It's also called, I think, the giant forget-me-not, for good reason, because they have beautiful sort of sprays of bright blue little daisy-shaped flowers. They are so stunning and beautiful in the spring when all of your bulbs are coming up, just to have this blue mound. Brunnera itself is gorgeous throughout the entire season. They have broad heart-shaped leaves, similar to the hosta, but they're usually a little bit smaller than the hosta leaves. They have this really gorgeous shape, like a spade or a heart, and they are very fuzzy. It's an interesting kind of look in the garden, and they're just this beautiful silver color with a darker veining. Really interesting. If you struggle with deer, these are great because they're deer resistant. The deer don't like that kind of fuzzy foliage, but they are really, really beautiful. They grow in zones 3 through 8, 12 to 18 inches tall and 12 to 24 inches wide. They love full to partial shade. They prefer moist, well-drained soil, and the heart-shaped foliage has these stunning, beautiful forget-me-not flowers that come up in the spring. So many shade garden perennials bloom in the springtime, and the next one is actually the earliest spring bloomer that I can think of, and that is hellebores. For some places around the world, hellebores will bloom at Christmas time. They're called Lenten roses. They have beautiful sort of evergreen hand-like leaves that sort of pop out. They look down. Most of the varieties of hellebores sort of look down. So what I've done is I've placed mine on the hillside so that you can kind of see their faces, even though they like to they're a little shy, they like to tilt their heads down. And you can get them in a variety of different colors. Very beautiful. There's one called Anna's Red, which I'd like to get in my garden. That's a beautiful sort of fuchsia, kind of magenta-ish, burgundy, I guess, color. There are, pinks and whites and greens, and then most of them, after, the season has, their bloom time has sort of come to an end and they've faded, you can still leave them up throughout the year and they still provide that really interesting structure. They fade and they definitely don't look as vibrant, but it's sort of like once they do their thing and then other things take over, they just are a nice kind of structural element to continue to have those blooms throughout the entire year. And having little clusters of them can be really gorgeous. The pollinators love them. So if you're growing for pollinators, the pollinators are gonna love all of these. They love the astilbes. They love the tiarella. The pollinators, it's so cute when the tiarella is in bloom, the pollinators will just come up and almost like push the tiarella over. Same with the brunnera. They're gonna love that, especially these early spring bloomers because they haven't eaten for so long. They're coming out of hibernation. They need that food. They need that pollen. Hellebores grow in zones 4 through 9. They grow 12 to 24 inches tall and 18 to 24 inches wide. Partial to full shade, thrive in rich, moist, well-drained soil. They really are so early in their bloom time, late winter to early spring, and they have evergreen foliage, which is a nice little bonus. Next up, we have Lady's Mantle or Alchemilla mollis. Now this one can handle a lot of sun as well. This is a really beautiful sort of roughly leaved foliage, sort of looks like a heuchera, a green heuchera, but kind of pulled together, and beads of water when they land on the Alchemilla mollis. It's similar to a lupin foliage where they just look like little gems or jewels inside of the foliage. It's really beautiful to go out in the morning when there's a lot of dew and you just see these little jewels inside of the leaves. And then they have these gorgeous sprays of chartreuse blooms, and if you cut them back they will bloom again throughout the season, which is really nice. One of you in another video mentioned the Chelsea chop when I was talking about successive blooms. That's a great tip for sort of maintaining successive blooms throughout your garden, is just to go through and cut back a certain amount, and then that way you can have the blooms that are blooming then and then have the other ones kind of come up. So that's a great tip. Grows in zones 3 through 8. It's 12 to 18 inches tall, 18 to 24 inches wide, and it likes moist, well-drained soil. Nothing new there, and it tolerates partial shade. So next up we have a few ground covers. Lamium is such a fantastic plant. For us, even though we get so cold in the winter, sometimes down to negative 22, it has been evergreen for us, which is so crazy. Maybe we have a microclimate since we put the fence in. But it has these beautiful, some of them have the gorgeous variegated silvery foliage with darker green on the outside, and that they spread, so they cover the ground so you don't have to weed as much, and they're just so sparkly and gorgeous in shadier corners, and they bloom in a variety of different colors. Again, it's usually white to purple, so white, ivory, pink, purple, lavender, lilac-y, and then deep purple. They have gorgeous, gorgeous blooms, and they're in the salvia family. So they have that, they have like a lip where that pollinators kind of land on the lip and pull it down. They kind of like a snapdragon, where they pull the lip down in order to get the pollen. But it's really, they bloom beautifully. They bloom, successively throughout the year, and they're just a great one. Lamium is fantastic for sort of planting in a little block, especially if you have clusters of flowers and plants next to it, just to provide a little bit of harmony before you, carry on with your next drift of flowers. So lamiums grow in zones 3 through 9. They grow 6 to 12 inches tall and 12 to 24 inches wide. They grow in partial to full sun, thrive in well-drained soil, and tolerate a range of conditions. We have just a few left, so I'm going to try and do these rapid fire. The next two can be kind of invasive, but they're both ground covers. The first one is sweet woodruff, which has sort of miniature lupin-like flowers, gorgeous little white, happy, sweet little flowers in the spring, and they're gorgeous to spread underneath a tree or something like that. I think they provide this really gorgeous ground cover. Vibrant green, so like a rich, true green. Very beautiful to pair next to something that's blue or purple or a conocloa, something yellow or silvery colored. Very, very beautiful little plant, and here are the stats for it. It grows in zones 4 through 8, 6 to 12 inches tall, so little diminutive plants, and they spread indefinitely. They grow in partial to full shade. They prefer moist, rich soil, but they tolerate dry shade as well, like I was talking about underneath the tree. And they have fragrant white flowers in the spring. They're an excellent ground cover, but they can spread aggressively, as can our next one, which is Lily of the Valley. Now, we inherited Lily of the Valley when we bought our cottage, and it is something that I just absolutely love. It's one of the first things that really pops up, one of the first perennials that really kind of shows its true color in the spring. So to me, I just love the plant, and I think the little lily of the blossom, like a little lantern of little ivory colored bells, just miniature and beautiful. And the leaves themselves are straight upright, and they kind of look like blades, but they don't grow very tall at all. So they grow in zones 3 through 8. They grow 6 to 12 inches tall and very short. They spread indefinitely again. They like partial to full shade. They thrive in moist, rich soil. They tolerate dry shade as well. And they have these little fragrant bell-shaped flowers in the spring, great for naturalizing in shady areas. Next up, we have bleeding hearts, another beautiful flower, very, very unique, very whimsical, magical looking flower. They look like tiny little hearts with a little spiral at the end. And if you pull on, they have a little pokey bit that comes out at the end. And if you pull on that, it kind of opens up the plant, and that's how the pollinators get in. They are stunning. I absolutely love them. And you can get them in whites, pinks, and almost like fuchsia skewing red. We have some really vibrant, rich ones. We have some white ones on our property, and they are just gorgeous. So bleeding hearts, or Dicentra spectabilis, grow in zones 3 through 9, 24 to 36 inches tall, 18 to 30 inches wide, partial to full shade, prefer moist, well-drained soil, as does most things on this list. And they have those iconic heart-shaped pink or white flowers in the spring. They pair beautifully with hostas and ferns and all of the other shade plants that we talked about. Next up, we have Bergenia, or pig squeak. This is another one that I actually haven't grown. I haven't been able to find them at my local garden centers, but they are a very beautiful pinky color flower, is mostly what I've seen in photographs. And they just look very glossy, very big, broad leaf. And instead of it being kind of like a ruffly leaf or heart-shaped, they're just these sort of big, almost like giant curled under lily pads. Very glossy, very rich green. And they provide that very lush, again like the hostas, that healthy look in a garden. So they have those glossy leaves that just make things look like they're well nourished and hydrated. Also called pig squeak, they grow in zones 3 through 8. They get 12 to 18 inches tall and 12 to 24 inches wide. They thrive in partial to full shade, and they thrive again in moist, well-drained soil. So again, they have large glossy leaves, and they have fall interest. Those leaves will turn red in the fall. And next up, another super whimsical one is Aquilegia, or columbines. These are such gorgeous fairy-like flowers. They look like little fairies in the garden. They kind of look like windswept butterflies. They are stunningly beautiful. They come in a range of different colors. I mean, throughout the rainbow. I don't think there's a color that I haven't seen columbines in. We have some blues and some pinks that have, white. They're usually bicolor. A lot of them have 2 different colors on them, which just add that real interest in the garden. But a beautiful kind of, freckled throughout a cottage garden with different varieties of columbine, just stunningly beautiful. You can get yellows and purples and lilacs, and you can get whites and creams, and I've seen some that have green on them even. So aqualegias grow in a zone 3 through 9, 12 to 36 inches tall, 12 to 24 inches wide, partial shade, prefer well-drained soil, but they are adaptable, they're elegant, they're nodding flowers in various colors, and they attract hummingbirds. Next up we have Jacob's Ladder or Polemonium. This is a gorgeous, the leaves are pinnate, so they kind of stand off against one another. And another pinnate leaved one that I didn't include on this list is Solomon's Seal, another beautiful one that blooms, white blooms, bell-shaped blooms, a little bit larger, much larger than the Lily of the Valley in the spring. But these ones are just so interesting. They have these beautiful, I have one that has this gorgeous periwinkle blue flowers, and they just look so, they're tiny little flowers. They look very, very magical. I included them again in the Miyazaki garden, so they're very enchanting. They're called Jacob's Ladder because the leaves have that pinnate thing, which is kind of off, almost like a ladder. So you could kind of imagine climbing the leaves. They grow in zones 3 through 8, 12 to 24 inches tall, 12 to 18 inches wide. They like partial to full shade. They prefer moist, well-draining soil. And the fern-like foliage and the clusters of blue or purple flowers in the spring provide so much interest in a shade garden. Next up, I have kind of a controversial one for a shade garden, but hear me out. Next is clematis. Now, so many people associate clematis with a sunny garden, a sun-drenched cottage garden, an arbor with clematis growing over it. However, clematis actually loves to have shady feet and a sunny face. So if you plant some at the base of a trellis or an arbor or even up the side of your house like I've done, as they, grow out of the shade, as long as you keep their feet in the shade and then they have some sunny space that they can reach, they will love you for it. It might take a few years for them to start to bloom, but in that time you can plant some other things that'll grow a lot quicker. I have a very shady trellis that I've been growing clematis up, and in the meantime, while it's slowly making its way up to the sunny part of the arch, I have been planting annual climbers, morning glories, and that's a wonderful way to do it. It's just to fill in that space with an annual climber while you're waiting for your perennials to really take off. So clematis can grow in zones 4 through 9, varies by variety, as does their height and spread. So 6 to 12 inches tall, it can get more than that, and 3 to 6 feet wide. They like shady feet and sunny faces, like I said, so keep their roots in the shade and give their vines some sun. They require well-draining soil, and they have beautiful, showy flowers in a range of colors, and they add beautiful vertical interest to a shade garden. Oh my God, there are so many others that I didn't mention. My favorite plant of all time, geraniums. My favorite geranium is the Spessart, but any hardy geranium, Geranium cranesbill. These are wonderful woodland plants that thrive in shade but love the sun as well. So you're looking at zones 3 through 9 for these hardy geraniums, so lots and lots of different gardens can have them. Moist again, but well-drained soil. This is typical of so many of these on this list. The height really varies, but anywhere between 5 to 30 inches tall, and they can spread up to 3 feet. Next, I just want to talk about pulmonaria. Oh my gosh, another absolute favorite. It's also called lungwort. This is a gorgeous foliage plant, long, wide, lung-shaped leaves with sort of white polka dots, hence lungwort. There's beautiful, delicate little pink, purple, and blue bell-shaped flowers in the spring, which pair beautifully with tulips, particularly the purple parrot. They bloom simultaneously for us, and that color combination is spectacular. So these are, again, zones 3 through 9. This is all variety dependent, moist but well-drained soil, 8 to 20 inches tall by 1 to 2 feet wide. And these are semi-evergreen. But there are so many others, woodland phlox, particularly the blue moon variety. Primulas are fantastic. Epimediums, the list goes on. I'd love to hear yours as well, if you don't mind sharing those in the comments. There are so many more that we could talk about, but let's jump into biennials. Now, as I said, a lot of these shade perennials, they bloom in the spring. So if you want more flowers throughout the entire gardening year, then here are some fantastic biennials and annuals that you can plant in your garden. We're gonna start with some biennials that are my favorites that you can start from seed. So foxgloves, obviously foxgloves. Foxgloves are fantastic. Some of them can even be annuals, but biennial flower. They are these spires of individual trumpet-like flowers that all of the pollinators love, the hummingbirds love, the butterflies love. I mean, they just attract the most beautiful things. They're one of my absolute favorite flowers in the garden, if I'm honest. They have usually some speckles on the bottom of their trumpet, and they just look incredible. You can get them in a variety of different colors: white, peach, a smoky kind of silvery color. You can get them in, the most typical kind of colors are the gloxiniflora colors. So that's the ivory, the pink, the purple. Georgie's really wanting to come and say hello.
Hey, hi, George.
Yeah, they come in a variety of different colors: peachy colors, lavender colors. They're just so, so beautiful. Again, you can plant them as annuals. Some varieties are annuals, but most of them are biennials, and you can get a big packet of them for not very much money, and that will you can spread them and they'll last for years. They do spread quite aggressively because each of the little flowers creates a pod that has thousands of seeds in it. So you can just take that after they're all dried and rattle it around if you're wanting them to spread. But they're stunning and they have very fuzzy leaves. They're very, very poisonous. So just, obviously be careful when you're planting any of these things in your garden. Just be mindful and make sure you're reading the plant tags. So with biennials, you can either plant them indoors and then, sow the seeds and then transplant them outside, or you can direct sow them and just sort of let them do their thing. Foxgloves will self-seed freely in your garden. So once you've planted them once, you can almost look at them like they're a perennial because they're going to be coming back. I love the gloxiniflora. I love the Dalmatian peach foxglove. There's a blend from Johnny Seeds that I get every single year, and I can't remember what it's called right now, but it's just a little bit smaller, but it has this beautiful lilac and pink and red, fuchsia kind of color, and white and cream. Very, very beautiful. And then we have a wild one here that's the grandiflora. It's sort of a soft yellow color that's so gorgeous, kind of a different shape than the other ones. The mouth is the opening of the trumpet is a little bit narrower, and that's a really beautiful one. But yeah, the entire plant, including the seeds, are poisonous. Next up is Angelica sylvestris. This is another one that you can start from seed. It's a great biennial. Very, very beautiful. Sort of like a cluster of small flowers at the top, almost like a verbena or a lace-cap hydrangea kind of look, kind of like an umbellifer sort of look, where it's, but the stems themselves are usually a really pretty purple color. And then the flowers are this soft lavender, very beautiful. Forget-me-nots are the next one. What a fantastic plant. They come in that, typically they're bright blue, like the Brunnera, sort of sky blue, happy blue, so welcome in those spring months. But I've been really digging the white and the sweet little pink varieties, which are wild forget-me-nots, which we have wild in our woodlands, that I've been gathering and transplanting into our garden. They've been kind of cross-pollinating, and we've been finding white and pink varieties. So I'm trying to save those and move them around, but those are a great one for a shade garden. Those are going to want a little bit more sun, and they can really tolerate sun, but like I said, they grow wild in our woodland all around, so they really will do well in a shade garden. Next up, we have teasels, which I always thought that was just the way that British people said thistles, but no, teasels are sort of like a thistle, but they're a biennial that you can, plant from seed and sort of spread around. But they're a beautiful one for a wildlife garden. So if you wanted to invite wildlife into your garden, that's fantastic. The birds love to eat those seed heads, especially in the winter time. So that's a great way to kind of extend the winter interest in the garden. The next two are considered invasive in the US. Honesty is the next one, and that one's invasive in parts of the US, but honesty is beautiful. I've seen it in these beautiful purple and pink flowers. Gorgeous. The shape of the flowers reminds me of a wallflower or a stalk flower. And they just have like a very beautiful look in the garden. They can tolerate shade, and they have a fantastic, like the teasels, they have fantastic winter interest because they form these little coin-like seed heads, and the seed heads, the little seeds form inside of them, and I'm sure you've seen them used in flower arrangements and things like that. They're fantastic for, winter wreaths and things like that, because they're just this beautiful kind of interesting look in the garden, and you can keep them up in the garden so that throughout the winter you have something interesting to look at. But they have multiple seasons of interest like that. Now there's another one, Mother of the Evening, or Hesperus, and it's also called Sweet Rocket. And that one, beautiful flower, a similar kind of look to the honesty flowers, but they spread like wildfire. I mean, they're invasive in the US, so we can't grow them here, but I know a lot of you watch from other parts of the world, so if you can grow those, always double check. But if you can grow those are so beautiful, such beautiful biennials for a shade garden. And then you can add annuals to really pack out this space with these vibrant blooms. Annuals are great because they're sort of like everything is just packed into the one year, so they really have to perform. They're sort of built to perform. So this is where you can get so much color and so much bang for your buck. So we'll start with the flowers that you can get. You know, some of my favorites are begonias. You have wax begonias, rex begonias, tuberous begonias. You know, these thrive in deep, deep shade to sun, and they can survive in so many different, you know, conditions. I've had them growing in a really dry place, in a really wet place, in a really shady place, in a really sunny place. I have 4 window boxes in the front of the cottage, and 2 of them are in almost complete shade, and the other 2 are in sun. And I've realized, I tried different things the first few years, and I realized the thing that loves it there the most is surefire white begonias or big white begonias. They just thrive there, but they come in colors like reds and whites and pinks and yellows and peaches, and they're very, very beautiful. Next up we have fuchsias, and you can get the trailing variety, which is so beautiful, but this is another one that just looks so whimsical. If you're really going for that enchanting garden, I think you should really do some fuchsias. We planted a really beautiful variety last year that was white and pink, and it looked like a little dancer, a miniature little fairy sort of floating in the garden. Really beautiful. They love shade and they attract hummingbirds as well. So that's a really fantastic one. Next up we have impatiens and sunpatiens. And I've noticed that sunpatiens for us grow really well in sun and shade. If it gets too hot and it's too dry, they will wilt a little bit in the hottest part of the day. But, you know, they really seem so happy in our garden, and I think we're going to go really heavy on those next year. Then we have Brawalia, beautiful purple flower. They just look like these little happy faces of purple, and they're lined with sort of deeper lines. So some of the purple starts to fade in the center of the flower, and then they have this deep ribbing, which just makes them look so interesting, almost like a sketch and a watercolor come to life. Perennials is another great one, wishbone flower. Very interesting, almost orchid-like blooms, but tubers. Really gorgeous, and those come in a few different colors. I've mainly seen them in the sort of blue to white to purpley kind of categories. And then violas and pansies. These are just such cheerful blooms that we can put in the garden starting in the springtime. That's usually the first thing that comes to our garden center, and it's just so nice. I know for so many of you, you can actually plant them in the fall and then have them for spring interest as well, which is fantastic. So those are perfect for a shade garden. You can put them in a little pot. I think they look so charming in a terracotta pot with some green and white patina on it. Really beautiful spring color, and some of them bloom through most of the season as well. And next up, a few foliage annuals that you could use. Obviously, coleus comes in a variety of different colors. You can get broad leaves, you can get squiggly leaves. They're really gorgeous. They are tall, so they add that height in the back of a shade border or anywhere in the shade border. And they're just very, very interesting. You can get ones that are purple, red, you know, vibrant green, yellow. There are just so many colors. So coleus is one that I think you have to have in a shade garden. And next up we have Persian shield, beautiful foliage plant, gorgeous, very unique. And I think this can be a great one that will do really well in a tropical garden. If you'd like me to show you how to kind of design a tropical garden, I love the look of those, even though it's not what I would have in my garden, but those are really, really fun. But they can also be great in a cottage garden for a space that you have like a little blank space in terms of blooms, because their foliage is so beautiful. To me, in a garden, it almost looks sort of like vibrant purple and turquoise, really gorgeous. You know, they kind of look like these little blades of leaves. Very, very gorgeous to add some beautiful luster in your shady border. And our final annual here today is the elephant's ear, or the colocasia. And this is a really big, huge leaved plant. They are often used as house plants, but you can use them as annuals in the garden as well. And they provide such beautiful interest. A lot of them have really glossy, gorgeous leaves. You can also get some that have a little bit more of a muted leaf, but they are just this big, they almost look like sort of like an African mask. They're very, very beautiful, like an elephant ear. You know, they're just these beautiful, intricate leaves, and they provide this really interesting structure in a garden. Again, that would be a great one for a tropical garden. Next up, we have shade-tolerant shrubs. for structure. So shrubs provide structure, they provide privacy, and some of them can provide year-round interest. So we're gonna jump right off with hydrangeas, particularly oak leaf hydrangeas. These are fantastic because they're sort of all-season interest plants. They come out in the spring, they have beautiful, foliage. Then when the flowers start to come out, even before they bloom, they look so gorgeous, the little buds. And then when they bloom in the flower, obviously that looks stunning. They stay on for so long, so much of the season, and huge blooms, so they really make an impact. And then they, you can leave the blooms up throughout the winter. Absolutely gorgeous. And in the fall, they turn bright, vibrant red, the leaves. So gorgeous plants. They grow in zones 5 through 9. They're large, they're dramatic, and they have white to pink kind of mauve-y colored flowers. Next up is mountain laurel. I have been trying to get one of these for so long, but they have fascinating little flowers. They just look so interesting, and I am so excited to finally have one in my garden. But they're a glossy leaved, beautiful shrub to have in your cottage garden. They grow in zones 4 through 9. They have these clusters of delicate blooms. Next up we have viburnums. I actually added a viburnum to our shade garden, or our dining garden, and I'm so excited to see it bloom. It hasn't bloomed yet, but you can get so many different varieties of viburnums. They are just so interesting and intricate. The leaves can be very dynamic. Some of them have really deep veining that looks really interesting. The one that I planted in my shade garden has this really interesting look to it. Again, it almost looks like it's been sketched. The leaves are really pretty, and the blooms on all of them look like sort of like lace cap hydrangeas. So if hydrangeas don't do well in your area, try a viburnum shrub. And many of them will have interest in the way of berries as well. So another great one for the wildlife, and it's going to be beautiful during the winter as well. Next up we have pyrus, particularly the purity variety. This is another one, very glossy leaves, so it looks super healthy in the back of a border. We have one, and it just does so well. And before we put our deer fence up, the deer didn't touch that one, even though they mowed down everything else, including yew, which is poisonous to them. They ate the boxwood, they ate all of our rhododendrons and azaleas, but they completely left that one alone. And it just is absolutely stunning. It has these delicate clusters of ivory bells, sort of like taking a lily of the valley and just clustering them all together. Really, really beautiful. They almost look a little bit vintage to me, a little bit antique in the garden. I don't know why, but they're just a very beautiful plant. And they grow in USDA zones 5 through 9, and they're fantastic for wildlife. Skimmias are another great option as well. They grow in zones 6 through 9, so I'm not super familiar with that because we're in a gardening zone 5A. And also quince. Quince is a great one. They can actually thrive in a shady garden. You can get varieties of quince that are all kinds of different colors. The blooms on the quince are just so magical looking. They're these little pops. They almost look like peonies that are about to burst, but miniature. They're really, really beautiful. And the buds on them, they kind of form all throughout the branches. They look so interesting and gorgeous, but the deer will eat those like crazy. So if you do have deer, just be mindful of that. And those grow in zones 4 through 9. And next up, you can plant Daphne as well, which is a great, very fragrant shrub that blooms sort of in the wintertime for a lot of people. It grows in zones 6 through 9, although I have heard of one sort of mysterious shrub, Daphne shrub, that can grow in my growing zone, zone 5. I just haven't been able to find it yet. So if you know of that one, let me know. But Daphne would be a great one to add to your garden as well. Okay, we have some evergreen shrubs as well. We have azaleas, we have camellias, and we have rhododendrons. Those are very, very common ones for a shade garden, but that doesn't make them any less beautiful. They are stunning. Camellias are beautiful. Azaleas and rhododendrons, you can get some really huge rhododendrons, and those two come in colors of all different varieties, and those will stay evergreen in most zones. Camellias are typically a zone 6 through 10, rhododendrons are 4 through 9, and azaleas are typically 5 through 9. These are classic flowering shrubs for shade. A couple of other classics, and these are great for structure, are boxwoods and yews. I love using yews in the garden. They are wonderful because they take to pruning really, really well. Same with boxwoods. They have a very interesting kind of structure to them, and to have something evergreen in a shade garden really helps. Especially if you live in a deciduous woodland like I do, where so much of what you're looking at is just sticks. It's so nice to have evergreens sort of speckled throughout. And that is it Those are all the plants that we're including in this video for the shade garden, and it's just gonna be a gorgeous cottage garden. So hopefully that gives you some inspiration of some plants to be on the lookout for when you go to your garden center in the spring. So obviously when you're planting any garden, there are all kinds of things to consider, not just the lighting requirements, right? You know, things like what kind of soil you have. Is it alkaline? Is it acidic? Is it dry shade or wet shade? Does the shade sort of change throughout the season? Maybe it's, you know, really dark in the spring, but then by the summer, it's kind of a full sun area. But generally, if you have a shady space, all of the plants that I've mentioned will thrive. So now let's go ahead and jump right in and design a cottage shade garden. Okay, so we have our garden design software pulled up and we're gonna go ahead and design this garden. The software that I'm using is called iScape. And what I've done is created, it's like an AI image with a backyard with some trees. And so what we're gonna do here is we're just gonna create a cottage garden in this shady space. It looks kind of similar to a rectangular back garden that many of us here in the United States have, but it could serve as a garden kind of anywhere in the world. So I'm gonna start out by making a winding path, because creating a trajectory in the garden is a tip that I talk about all the time, that's a great first step when you're designing your garden. And I think this app is made for iPhones and iPads, so it's a little bit easier to draw with your finger than on the mouse. And then just add some texture. Now that we have our stone path in place, I'm gonna create some borders along the path, and then I think we're gonna leave some grass just to create a little space, maybe to take the dog out, or to just maybe we'll put some kind of hardscape, or you know, like a little table and chairs, a dining table. Okay, so it's a rough kind of thing. You get the picture though. So I wanna start with some hardscape. Let's add something interesting, like an arbor or an arch that's leading you into the garden. So we're gonna add this arch in here, and up this arch, they seem to have ivy growing, but we're gonna put clematis, trusting that the top of the clematis is going to be in the sun. I mean, I already wanna go to this garden and I wanna be in it and I wanna walk through that arch. Yes, please. Gorgeous. Next, let's plant some of our shrubs. So I want to start with some hydrangeas. Let's maybe not compete with the purple, so let's do a white. Let's do Annabelle. Let's do one on either side of the arch. So that's a really beautiful entrance to the garden, I think. Let's do a standard hydrangea. Let's add that kind of, maybe we want to put one back here, one back here. So maybe you have a couple more. So there's sort of that repetition of the hydrangeas, but they're not so close together. So the white hydrangeas here, and then in the back. I think it might be kind of nice to add some oak leaf. Perfect. So here we have an oak leaf hydrangea, and we can move that. Let's put that under our tree, and then let's create a few more of those around the tree there. I think that'll look really pretty. Then maybe we'll repeat that one in the back as well, since we talked about that one. Climbing hydrangeas are beautiful too. So we could do a climbing hydrangea climbing up one of the trees. Nice. Should we do a climber up the tree? Let's do it. Why not? Maybe we'll do it in one of the back ones. Let's say that that's climbing up that one in the back. Cool. I would probably add some more colorful ones, like this twist and shout is a blue one. That's really pretty. You can add that on either side. Let's keep going with our shrubs, and let's try to add a little mountain laurel. Maybe we'll put that actually right where you kind of head down. So that's the centerpiece of, as you walk through the arch, that's kind of one of the first things that you see with the climbing hydrangea and the tree behind it. That looks nice, because mountain laurels can be a little spenny. So, all right, then let's do some evergreens. So let's do some yews. Do we want to do topiaries? Cloud topiaries are really beautiful. Let's do a combination. Let's do a couple of these pruned yews, and let's have that be kind of like our structural evergreen element in the back. So there's some structure in the winter. Next up, let's add the topiarized yew. And I'm thinking this English yew, because that's very pretty. And we'll put that in the back there in between the two hydrangeas, the standard and the other one. This is getting a nice shape to it. It's a nice like structural background. Very nice. Okay, cool. So it's very peaceful, very kind of you know, simple color palette, a little bit of light pink. You have some blue and some purple and white. Very nice. These are my colors. Then we have, I think that's gonna be it. So we're doing yew instead of boxwood, some hydrangeas, mountain laurel. That sounds good for the shrubs. And we've added one perennial in the form of the clematis. Now let's go ahead and start to add some of our perennials. So let's start with hostas. Let's do blue, hosta, and let's have that kind of at the front of the path. So there we go. I think that's really pretty, especially since there's a lot of flower interest and right when you come in, it's nice to have those hostas there to kind of balance that out. While we're with the hostas, let's add a couple more. You know, I love cottage gardening, you know, kind of plunking plants throughout and repeating them. So let's repeat the same hosta variety. So we have 4 of those. I want to add these hostas in bloom, and it's a different kind of vibe. And I'm going to add those kind of in the middle of the border. Maybe back here, maybe underneath this hydrangea. Yeah, I think that's nice underneath the hydrangea standards. Pretty. Okay, next up, let's get some flowers in here. I'm gonna do some annuals. Let's do some begonias. Let's keep it in the whites and pinks and purples. I'm thinking maybe a white begonia will be what we go for. And that's a nice leaf, or you know, the color of that leaf is really nice to kind of counteract the hosta. Lovely. Let's repeat those again, farther back, and I'm going to repeat them again in the same pattern, so on either side of the hostas. You get the picture. I think that looks nice. You could do a Rex begonia, but I think we're going to move on. Let's add some impatiens, because that's where you can really get some nice color. Let's add, these ones are pretty pink, but I'm kind of liking the softer pinks and the really delicate color palette that we have going on here. Let's try this one. So now I just put some of the pink and white impatiens underneath those yew topiaries. That'll add some really beautiful interest at the base there. And now I think I'm gonna add some astilbes. Oh, these pink ones are gorgeous. This is the perfect pink, that soft pink. I think putting really vibrant colors far away, like at the back of the garden, is really beautiful because it kind of draws you back, and you can have softer colors in the front. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but that's an idea. This soft pink is gorgeous. I love it. And then let's have some white ones next to the blue hydrangeas, because the white ones, in my experience, the white ones that I've had have been a little bit bigger than the pink ones or the purple ones. So I think that'll be a nice little accent there next to our hydrangeas. This is looking really, really pretty. Okay, so we obviously have lots more to fill in, so I'm just gonna go ahead and fill things in and kind of play around. So I just added some Terrenia behind the astilbes, because again, these astilbes only bloom for a little, you know, a short period of time, usually 2 to 3 weeks. And so once those are done, then that'll just be a low, very kind of lacy foliage. And then we have some of the Terrenia behind those. Those are an annual, so those are going to bloom throughout the year. We'll do the purple heuchera there, kind of spilling onto the path. It looks like they only have warm colored columbines, so I'm going to leave those out for now. I'm going to tuck in some bleeding hearts underneath this tree here. That'll be pretty. And let's add some perennials. We're going to add some lamium as a ground cover in the back here. I think I might move these into the back of the border, because I'm going to put some lily of the valley underneath that tree, I think. Yeah, that'll be a nice pop of color underneath here. So you have the white underneath the evergreen, and then you have the white of the hydrangea underneath the other tree. This is looking really good. I mean, in reality, we should be putting lily of the valley kind of behind here and over here, because it's probably going to spread. Let's add some tiarella into the mix. Let's put these next to our hydrangeas in the front, kind of underneath the hydrangeas. I think that's kind of sweet. And then I think I want something a bit taller in the back. Let's do some Bergenia. Bergenia. I think we put those on the other side of the hostas there. I think that'll be nice. I'm gonna add some Jacob's ladder to fill in some of these little spaces. And now we're gonna fill in all the spaces with foxgloves. Foxgloves everywhere. Soft kind of purple ones in the front. Let's do some pink ones in the back of the borders. Let's do them all throughout the back of the border. So then the foxgloves are really kind of like a big statement. And let me actually do that behind the hydrangea too. I love this. Fun! Nice, so we're repeating that blue hosta so you still get that kind of interest. I mean, in reality, a lot of these wouldn't be blooming at the same time, so it might not look as kind of wild, but I think this would be such a stunning garden. So you have great structure. So in the winter time, you've got the yews in the back. These really beautiful topiarized yews, these that are trimmed in these sort of conical shapes, very beautiful. You have lots of shrubs that are gonna have gorgeous structure. You have these hydrangea standards that are gonna have great structure, but also have the blooms. We have lots of hydrangeas that are gonna keep those blooms on, and so that's some interest in the winter time, even if they start to fade. A lot of these perennials are gonna go away, but you have this beautiful stone path. You have the trees here. You have this gorgeous arched trellis here, and that's really beautiful. And if you did have ivy climbing up it the way it was in the original, then you would have that. Ivy is typically an evergreen in most areas, so that would be some more evergreen interest throughout the season. You know, the oak leaf hydrangeas that we have underneath this tree, if the tree is changing colors, those are going to get nice and red, and that's going to be really pretty. The bergenias in the back are going to get nice and red. So in addition to the foliage up top in the canopy, you're going to have some little, you know, pops of different colors down in the base. Hostas for us typically get, you know, starts to turn yellow, which can look nice. They can, if they're paired with the right things, that can actually look like, you know, some nice fall interest. But yeah, I think this is a really nice cottage, you know, very dreamy, very whimsical, romantic cottage shade garden. Now, I know these won't all be blooming at the same time, but just look how many colors and how much vibrancy you can have in a shade garden. And you could do this with any color palette. You could do this with the bright reds and yellows and oranges, and you could do this with jewel colors, you know, purples and burgundies and, you know, bright, vibrant blues. But you can have a gorgeous, romantic, lush, thriving garden of your dreams in shade. A shade garden doesn't have to be dull or difficult. By adding layers of biennials, annuals, shrubs, and perennials, you can have a dynamic, romantic space that thrives in low light. So what is your favorite shade-loving plant? I would love to know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more gardening content, and I'll see you again in the next one. Bye.